Hi and welcome to the latest episode of the Leadership Untitled podcast with me, Rob Moores. This is the show that invites leaders to come along and share their stories, their experiences and expertise to hopefully help you guys to avoid some of the traps that we've fallen into, but also pick up some hints and tips along the way to become a better leader yourself. My guest this week is Steve Davis, 6 times World Snooker Champion. Why Steve Davis, you might ask? What's this relevant to the world of business? It absolutely is. In my opinion, in the 1980s, Steve was ahead of the curve in terms of sports psychology. Whilst he may not have called it that, and it may not have been known as that time, his mindset was quite unique and caused a stir within snooker circles at that time. It was very different to what else was around. In that time, he won 6 world championships, which included a couple of defeats in finals as well, which he bounced back from in a resilient way. How did he go about that? How did he drive himself to want to achieve again? And in the background of all this was Barry Hearn, his manager. A manager who enabled Steve to focus on the things that he needed to focus on to be the best he could be. So let's explore that and lots more with Steve as I welcome him to the show. Hi Steve, welcome to the Leadership Untitled podcast. How are you today?
Good, thank you. Well, I hope so, and it's a pleasure to be on.
Brilliant stuff. Now, thanks for coming along. And we've just kind of been talking about the challenges of sun on cameras. I've got sun blazing through a window at me, so I have my blinds down nearly all the time, and I feel like a little hermit. We're recording this on what day is it now? Middle of March. One of the first few days of sunshine. So happy days, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, over the last 2 years of Zoom meetings, you would have thought I could have got a better background than this, but I've just. All of the things I did during the lockdown of watching people on doing shows on YouTube of my sort of passions and hobbies, they all upgraded their cameras to the best things for they all upgraded their lighting and everything. And look at me, it's ridiculous. I haven't even got an LP in there. There's not even an LP in there. Look,
I like it. No, I got it the other day. Someone said to me, "Oh, you're one of them, are you? One of what? You're one of those that went out and bought a microphone when everyone did 2 years ago." Oh, well, I've got to do something when recording.
I assume there's nothing you could not possibly have done this podcast with a Rubiks Cube that wasn't perfectly done. It wouldn't have fit. It has to be done perfectly. It doesn't have. How can you lead? How can you lead if you can't do a Rubiks Cube?
Well, that's exactly it. Well, the story behind that actually was that was a bit of one of the turning points for me in terms of mindset, because you kind of see on the camera behind me that I've got mindset written on the whiteboard. And for 41 years, I said to myself, I couldn't do a Rubik's Cube. And then I sat down and just went for it. And I did it bit by bit. And now I can do it. I don't get me wrong. I've got no plans to try and do it in under 30 seconds like the best can. But I know I can do it in about 3 minutes. So boom. There you go. I'm not going to prove it right now, though.
my only the only thing I can do in that level is that puzzle,
right?
Which is a Chinese ring puzzle that's been around for maybe centuries, and that's my only claim to fame in the puzzle world, that I can do this blindfolded.
You blindfolded even?
I used to when I was a kid. My father made this. It's a very well-known puzzle in the puzzle world. Yeah. But my father made it at work in the metalwork department where he worked. Wow. And he brought it home, and he must have showed me how to do it, or it just happened. And as a kid, I knew I had sort of tendencies to be. This was never planned to be in this podcast. I knew I had tendencies for personal bests and achieving. I don't know, the better, always trying to get better than the last time. Yeah. I used to time myself to take it off and put it back on again. And as like you got it down to 4 minutes. I got this down to taking it off and putting it back on again in 2 minutes. And I thought I was probably the best person in the world at doing that until you look on YouTube and you see people that do 2 of them behind their back, and you realise, what you thought once was a really decent level is there's always somebody better.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, I got that down. I think my record now is just over 2 minutes.
I'm proud of you.
That. I went, right, that'll do. But like you, I went onto YouTube and there's people that do it in 0.3 seconds. And I'm like,
that's crazy. It's crazy.
My fingers would fall off if they tried to move that quick, let alone actually do it. It's crazy. Maybe that's the challenge we can set at the end of this, that people need to break our records for those 2 puzzles and we can have a crack at it.
The fastest 147 break by Ronnie O'Sullivan, 5 minutes and 20 seconds, I feel is very unlikely to ever be beaten. But there again, somewhere down the line, something happens and standards always get better.
They do. I remember watching that live. It was just awe-inspiring. It was just something. It was kind of that clip moment that I'd been a fan of watching Jimmy White for so long. And I know Jimmy had done the 147 as well in the Crucible. But when Ronnie just did that, he knew he had that in him, that pace in him. But when it all just came together and he did that, it was groundbreaking, really.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and when you think, Cliff Thorburn's 147, the first at the Crucible took 3 days. Yeah, so things have moved on.
I remember watching that one as well. You could probably have had a nap and then woke up and still see the end of it.
He had lunch halfway through it.
Like I say, thanks for coming along today. What really the listeners and the watchers that are watching this will be familiar with the reason I do this podcast. And your story, and that's what I love to bring to this podcast, is stories about your own personal self-leadership, just being so different in the 80s when you came out. I mean, I was speaking to my dad the other night that you were coming on, and he was just saying it was just the fact that no one really had ever done it before who was that young. Somebody young coming along and really like being so professional and winning things seemed a bit odd to him. My dad watching it at that time. So I guess first things first, what was the reasons that you took up the game in the first place, and probably approached it in a different way to a lot of the people who were gaining a lot of popularity at the time, like Alex Higgins and co.
Well, I mean, I was a product of the fact that it was my father's hobby. And the fact that, there was a snooker queue in the corner of our flat, and he used to go and play in a social club at weekends. And if there was anything on the television that was snooker, there wasn't a great deal back in the early 70s, but Pot Black was there, 1 frame a week on BBC Two, that sort of kick-started the whole thing. Yeah. If it wasn't for the fact that it was my father's hobby, I would probably have not been introduced to it at all. And things would never have transpired at the same rate as they would have done. Perhaps I would have fell in love with snooker when everybody else did in the 80s and taken it up, and maybe I would have been a late developer. But luckily for me, at the age of 14, I was going to a social club at weekends and sort of sucking it and seeing, really, and in a very short space of time. Even though I wasn't an overnight, it didn't come to me as easily as maybe it came to Ronnie O'Sullivan, Jimmy White, and Alex Higgins. Those levels of natural talent are still there. They just perhaps blossom in different ways. And anybody you see in a sport that's on television has an abundance of natural ability, even though we judge some to have more natural ability than others. They've all got to be, as good as it gets to be, in the top of the game. So, the game came easily to me in relation to the people I was playing against, and I improved hand over fist. And before I knew it, I was sort of playing at junior level nationwide, and then when I turned 18 at senior level, and then being tipped to be a professional. It all sort of happened with no plan, obviously. You're falling in love with a sport and then it becomes a profession is something you really don't know. And sometimes you don't even know it's happening until you are actually a professional. Yeah. So I actually turned professional, not with a view to making a career or to win the world championship. I actually turned professional. And at the time, I remember my only real thoughts about it was, great, I'm going to be playing against my heroes and trying to pit my wits against them. And I fancy, I'm getting better. So that was the level. And it was, I don't know if you could do it another way. Maybe because there was no money in the game back then, that you didn't think about it as a career. So maybe now if a young player, in a sport that has lots of prize money, like snooker does have a fair bit now, you might go, oh, I could make a living from this, and that's your then goal. That wasn't my goal back then because things were different.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned something interesting there, which I think it's worth exploring, is that the idea that we do view people or some people as having natural talent. And they sometimes get associated with having to practice less. And to do the things that they do so well, whereas some other people maybe get a view that maybe it doesn't come as naturally, and they practice every hour that God sends to get to that level. And I know that, one of the reasons again that I really felt there was a marriage in bringing you on to talk about this sort of stuff was when I watched Gods of Snooker, the documentary, the 3-parter last year, which is still on BBC iPlayer, I believe. Anyone wants to go and download it and take a look at it. And Barry Hearn would talk about you, that whilst some of the others should remain nameless for a moment, might have been out partying or celebrating or whatever it might be, you were back practicing for the next game or the next event or whatever it might be. So to what degree do you think that there is such a thing as that natural talent?
Well, I think from an outsider viewing the sport, I can understand how you can consider some to be, they're totally natural, totally gifted, and the others are the people that have had to graft at it and work hard at it. And I think they view it very black and white, in as much as they're totally polarized, and there's a chasm between that. But actually, I think it's probably more likely that it's a massively grey area when it comes to the amount of talent somebody's got and how much they work at it, and how much they need to work at it as well. Because I would be able to do, I could play a game of snooker after not picking a cue up for a month, and it wouldn't be long before I was back to normal, back to sort of running speed. But there's obviously something about the people who it does seem like it comes easier to, and maybe because the game is totally easy for them, they're the high end of that spectrum, maybe that doesn't develop the work ethic. Or it could be that having a lazy work ethic means that you do go down a road that is much more naturally gifted, or appears to be naturally gifted in the way you go about it. Because if you've been blessed with a load of talent for something, you pick the cue up, you may not go and do some driving range style practice. You may not go and do some of the little plans on the table that a lot of players like to do, because you can play the game wonderfully. So therefore you don't do that. So somebody viewing you from afar will go, hey, this guy just goes in the club and picks up a cue, starts knocking the balls around. This other guy, he does half hour hitting the ball up and down the spots. Because he's not naturally gifted. Well, he might be naturally gifted, but he chooses to hit the ball up and down the spots because that person's trying to develop some type of consistency or whatever. So I think it's much more of a grey area, because I quite, I do believe that anybody I can only talk about the snooker world, but I'm sure it translates to every other sport. I don't know about business, but it translates to every other sport. Everybody you see on TV, anybody in the top echelon of the game, they've got to be the best naturally gifted people in the world. It's not just on work ethic. Yeah, it might be a bit of temperament in matches. You may see some people who are tremendous but can't produce on the big stage in front of the cameras. That does happen, but there's only a little bit of overlap there. So the players in the game that I've played all my life, who would it be? The players, trying to think of a player Anthony Hamilton, another quite well player, that go through a big, Alan McManus, that go through Mark Selby. Here we go. It go through what looks like a very predetermined routine before they play every shot, and it looks a bit mechanical, a bit methodical. They're never going to have natural ability stamped on them by the general public, but they are incredibly talented people. Yeah. So I think the danger is the danger player is the one who is incredibly talented and actually it has got a great work ethic as well. And even though you wouldn't think it, that's Ronnie O'Sullivan.
Yeah, I mean, I think you mentioned that you're not sure about the business world. I think it's exactly the same, which is why I'm really interested in it. I think there are those. I'm a leadership coach by trade. And those people who just go out, and there are, I believe, certain people who are naturally better leaders than others. However, I would say that some of those natural tendencies have come about by their own experiences, the leaders or parents that they've had and not had, good or bad or indifferent. But again, it goes down to a lot of practice, coaching, and going on courses, and keeping well read on the subject, and talking to people about it, and all those sort of things. And I think it transcends different sports as well. Like you say, I look at certain golfers, for example, and I look at Nick Faldo. We had a chat just before we started recording about some of my kind of sporting heroes in the 80s and 90s. And the Nick Faldo was someone very methodical in that sort of same way, same ilk that you're talking about, that obviously had some natural talent because he won majors before he took himself away, rebuilt his swing and went after it again. But when he came back, he just seemed like a monster of efficiency doing it that way and having that pre-shot routine.
Yeah. And, the other thing as well is you learn on the job. So you don't have to, it doesn't come out of a manual as such. You learn the job in hand for whatever job that is, and that will require different skills and different things that you don't even know exist when you first start off. And whether you're able to do that's another part of it, whether you've got the ability to learn as well as having the talent, because maybe they're different skills.
Yeah, the ability to, and also the desire to, maybe. If you do feel that it's quite an easy thing to do, why do I want to go and learn and try and improve on something that I'm already great at or perfect at, dare you say? So when you kind of came into that snooker world then, and I guess, you were talking about the early 80s and I think it's right to say that you got Ray Reardon kind of coming towards, I would say, the end of his domination of the World Championships. Alex Higgins was obviously big and probably the exact opposite in the type of player that we're talking about, this natural people's champion that everyone wanted to win at that time. So what was that reception to your style, both, I guess, from audience and also snooker colleagues that were playing?
Well, I think any new kid on the block's going to get, it's exciting when somebody comes through. So initially that was, that was the natural progression. This kid's coming through. Next minute he's turned professional. Tip for the top, wins an event, tip to win the World Championship, and then produces the goods and wins. And then obviously everybody's going, "Well, I told you so." Yeah, I knew he was going to be great because that's. I think what happens especially in sport, is that, and it depends on how well the sport's been played over the years, to how much it's been exploited, so to speak. That when the game's relatively young as a sport, like snooker was back in that period of time, there's lots more room for improvement at the top. Nobody's reached the ceiling of human endeavour in that department. So I think the players prior to my era were great players, but they were the best of their bunch. And things were always going to move on. And I was part of the stepping stone of that. So once I sort of hit the top and started improving with the confidence that comes with winning, then I raised the bar. And so for a while, the general opinion in the public was wonderful. This person's he's playing the most amazing snooker anybody's ever seen. He's the most accurate. He never misses. Don't leave it and he plays you, and you can't. He puts you in all sorts of. Everything's good. And then somewhere down the line, obviously the world gets a bit fed up with that, and they don't want to see that for very long. You then become the pantomime villain. In the same way as in the box, I know, like Chris Eubank would, people like to see sort of people falling flat on their face after a while, even though they enjoy their progress up the ranks. So I experienced sort of quite a bit of that in the sort of the mid 80s. For a few years, I got a pass, like the honeymoon period, as they call it. Yeah. Then I became sort of, it's ruining snooker that somebody keeps winning all the time, which I don't think is the case, because when Tiger Woods was dominating golf, I don't think that ruined golf when he was dominant. But that's not the point. It's the fact that if people are that interested that they want to see somebody win or lose, then great for the sport. It's working on television as an entertainment. So I got a bit of negativity from the crowd, but it never really it didn't affect me in any way. But at some stage you get a lot more. People were a bit more vocal about wanting you to not win than would have been the normal polite crowd that would have come along to a snooker match. So, but dealing with that wasn't an issue whatsoever, because the most important thing is you understand what's happening and don't take it personally. So I used it in a positive way, really, that if that was the case, I must be really good. I must be better than really good if people are that affected by it that they want me to lose. So it wasn't a problem and it wasn't a personal thing. So and then of course the weird thing is you go full circle and then people want you to win again when you can't win. That's quite funny.
But that's really interesting, though, because I think for you, you're talking about that as quite a natural thing that, it obviously means this and it's not personal and all those things. And again, I think in any sport and also business, and probably more so in Britain, when someone's kind of on that pedestal, we love to see them fall down a little bit. And it does affect a lot of people. If crowds or customers or team or whatever it might be are booing them or wanting them to fail and had enough of them, it can knock a lot of people. How I would say probably before kind of leadership and self-leadership became such a well-written about thing, for you to kind of go into that positive mindset quite naturally, what was driving that?
What the fact that I could deal with people not wanting me to. But I think you're lucky. You're to some degree you're lucky if you don't. If that's the way that you perhaps it helps if you're pretty analytical. Perhaps it helps if you don't have too much worry about people saying things to you that it's hard to hurt your feelings. The sticks and stone line is there for a reason. And I must admit, I really have no interest. I could never have been upset by somebody saying something to me. I can't. You can't upset me. That's I'm bulletproof in that way. There may be something, but in most ways, about me, if somebody sort of ripped me to pieces personally or whatever, it can't upset me. So that is that may be something you're born with. I don't, perhaps it's a nice thing to aspire to, because, and it's not saying that you don't care about your profession or your job, but I think a bit like Twitter has now magnified the problem of people. Anybody that gets upset with anybody who criticizes you on Twitter, that you need to take a sort of check on that, because it's about that person who's the criticism's coming from. They've got the problem, not you. So probably the bottom line is, if you're dealing with people, you don't know why somebody's got a chip on their shoulder that they want you to lose, but it's their problem. If you could help them with that, perhaps that'd be nice for them, but it's certainly not going to affect me.
No, I think you're right. That's the social media thing it's just exploded it to a different level. I always say, if you've got one person out of 100 who doesn't like you, you're doing really well. However, you keep compounding that and suddenly you got 1 million and whatever, like the same proportion of that is, it's a lot of people that don't like me. Yeah, but it's not a lot of people. And if you had a camera in their living quarters, you probably realize why they've got this problem in the first place. Yeah. So but I mean, if anything, the power of positive thinking is to part of that is to probably sort of put your emotions on the back burner when you're doing stuff, because it's about what you're doing. It's not about feelings to some degree get in the way of it. It's good to do things without thinking too much. And if you're a deep thinker and you get hurt by what people are thinking about you, that's tough. I don't think you can stop that, because some people are very sensitive to, emotionally sensitive, and others aren't. But perhaps it helps to be emotionally in the backwaters. Perhaps that's why I became pretty good, cold as ice, maybe. Was that true the other way for you as well? Because I know there's a lot of sports people who really ride the crest of the wave of supporters and crowds supporting them. I think I certainly see people like if you stick in the same sport, people like Alex Higgins and Ronnie and Jimmy, I think you could notice when the crowds were excited and they were playing well, it just kept going to different levels. Is that the same for you, that when the crowd are loving you, though, you also kind of distance from that and didn't allow you to get too involved in it?
No, because you can get off. I think you can ride the crest of the wave on the excitement in the room. It doesn't necessarily have to be about them being on your side. Mm-hmm. As long as if you're playing a match and it's exciting, the crowd are going to be excited. That's the buzz. Whether they're on one side or the other, I don't think it's not really about that. It's you can the adrenaline buzz is there, but the adrenaline buzz is not the thinking. It's not the part that you start to analyze why people are, that bit you shouldn't have switched on when you're playing. You just got to be in free flowing mode, playing on your with your lizard brain, I suppose. And on occasions it is nice if you can get rid of your analytical brain and just let your lizard brain play. But that will come and go. So you will be aware of your things, but the more you can play on autopilot, I think the best. And I think
that practice again, I guess, as well.
Yes, that's why you practice. That's why you try and get muscle memory. But I do think that if there was, when I started playing, there wasn't really sports psychologists in snooker. It wasn't really it wasn't the thing, and so I missed the boat completely. So I have no experience of this, but I would imagine that any sports psychologist worth their salt would be trying to do this thing to get people to play more naturally, to stop thinking about it. And I think there was a book written on tennis that was then that a lot of golf people started to try and use. And the book was sort of about the way of just bounce, hit, and don't think about anything. And I forget what the writer was. It was quite, everybody's searching for trying to play golf well or whatever. and this book was like, okay, basically saying, if you're playing and you want to do well, just don't think about it, just go bounce, hit, which I thought, okay, fair enough. That's okay until you really want to do well. And then that's when the problems start. But the more you can play on autopilot, and if you can teach people to be able to switch into autopilot and let their talent take over, if there's a way of doing that, then that's a good. Then I think the sports psychologist has earned their money. But I don't know. I don't know how much that's achievable. And I'm not going to try and do you out of the job here, but. You haven't spent time with snooker players, so don't go down the snooker road. But there's loads of people that would love to be able to play more naturally and let their talent flow. And I look at them and think, you may never be able to do that. It just may not be in your makeup. And whether you can actually make it part of your makeup, I don't know. I haven't got a clue.
Oh, it's interesting.
I sense you can perhaps improve it, but I don't think you can make it good if it's not there at all.
I think it's how far down the line you are as well with it. I know that I'm watching the golf on at the moment while we're recording in Sawgrass, the Players' Championship, and I think it's there's a lot of parallels in that game because I think that what they were talking about, sometimes they are taught or they are analysing their own swing to such a degree that whilst they're stood over the ball in the competition, the one thing they're forgetting about is actually hitting the ball. They're going, right, well, the elbow needs to be there, and where's the club when I do this, and et cetera, et cetera. And then it all goes wrong, and they don't understand why that might be. And I know that, so when I was younger, I played quite a bit of golf, and my dad and myself they got loads of tuition videos, all the greats coming out and telling you how to do it. And I can remember one day when John Daly came along and won his first major, and he released a video, and his video was just called Grip It and Rip It. So you can imagine there wasn't a hell of a lot of tuition in that of what to do other than pick up the club, just give it a whack and see how you go with it. And I think there's a little bit in that just have a go without the tuition, see what things come naturally to you, which bits don't, and then let's try to hone some of those things before you try and build yourself in a way that is never going to be quite natural to you.
things that spring to mind about that is that obviously that's you use it with technique. That's what you do the practice for, the solo practice, and then hopefully that's set in stone, and then you can go and just play the game and play the and concentrate on the shots you'll get given and the rules, and trying to get more points than the other person or get the ball in the hole. But obviously, when you're working on something in practice, and it's a technique change maybe, it's hard, and especially if it sort of takes a bit of time to sort of ingrain. It's hard not to then take that into the matches. But I never felt it was a problem to have one technical thought on my mind when I was playing a match. And in some ways, I felt like that was maybe good because it gave you something to think about that maybe stopped you being so, your emotions flying around so much during the match. But actually, if you just went, okay, all I'm going to do today is keep my head still. And when I've hit the ball, leave the cue there afterwards. And if that's my swing thought, or the equivalent of the golf swing thought, if that was my thought for the day and I could focus on that, it was a little bit like a security blanket. And if I just did that all day long, then I wouldn't have the worries of everything else around me that could sometimes be all over the place. And didn't always work that well, because sometimes the technical change is tough to do and keep up. And when the emotions of the day go up, you forget about it and it's gone again, and because you haven't really instilled that. But my proudest moment was during the World Championship. I actually sort of successfully converted 2 swing thoughts and won the World Championship that year, doing 2 different technical changes. And for me, like from a proud sort of professional level, that was as good as it got. To be able to play the game and think of 2 other things at the same time that I was working on, for me was like I was really proud of myself on that moment.
So what year was that? What were those?
I think it was the year that I ended up beating John Parrott 18-3 in the final. But I think my first round match was against Ray Reardon, who was still playing the game. And after the first session, I was really struggling, and the table was playing. I couldn't. The table was playing too fast. I couldn't control the balls. And my father was my coach, or my sort of sounding board coach. We talked together. He knew my game better than anybody else, so he could see if things had changed. And we sort of worked out that the reason why I was finding the table too fast was I was pulling the cue back too far for playing the shot. I didn't need to pull it back that far. So therefore I pull it back too far, then I can't hit it soft enough. But if you pull it back a little bit, it's easier to hit the ball softer. So for the rest of the event, I concentrated on halving my length of backswing. It wasn't half, but it felt like half.
It felt like that extreme when you're changing something.
So it's massive change. And so I successfully changed. It's not that I hadn't done that before. I'd done that loads of times in practice, but so I knew what to do. But to do that during the World Championship, and there was one other thing, I can't remember what it was, but even so, that thing that I incorporated and playing in the most important tournament of the year was one of my proudest moments.
Absolutely. I think it is that focusing on that. If it is 2 things, it's 2 things, but focusing on one thing to change rather than having 15, 16, 17 different thoughts buzzing around your mind. I'm certainly now going to have a look on YouTube, see if I can find the Reardon match and then see the next match. And see
there's probably somebody got it somewhere.
So tell me about going back into the kind of the mid 80s then, and obviously you're on the scene now. You're winning world championships, and one of the big influencing factors for yourself, other than your father in that first world championship, was Barry Hearn. And not just in terms of yourself, but obviously over the course then of the rest of the decade, the way he wanted to reinvent the game of snooker, and obviously then brought more and more players into that stable alongside you. What was he like to work with and for? And explain to me about him setting that vision and what he was trying to achieve.
Well, Barry Hearn to me was a a totally different character. Anybody that I'd ever met up until that point, and probably still. But he owned a snooker club that I started to play in. I started to play in this snooker club in Romford in Essex, primarily because he just bought into these snooker clubs and he was trying to get people to play more in the clubs and thought, as an entrepreneur does, comes up with different ideas, put on a one-day event with lots of prize money that was unheard of back in that time for amateurs. And it attracted a lot of good players to come to play in his clubs. So even though it sort of feels like this fate's involved a bit, sometimes you make your own luck, and we both met each other. So then I started to become better at snooker, and we started to have more matches against professionals. I was still an amateur at the time. And then the next phase was that I was knocking on the doors of being a professional. And by then he'd become hooked on the world of snooker and the fun and the excitement of the matches. And so he started to become my manager before it was really an official manager player, agent player sort of setup. And then he more or less bullied me into turning professional before I felt I was ready. But he was totally right. He sort of an element of impatience to get on with having a young player coming into the professional ranks. But you have to realize that there was no money in snooker. And I don't know that he had the vision that there was going to be. The history books might tell it in a different way, but nobody knows what's around the corner. But what he was getting off on was the excitement of having a young kid on the block who started to look like he was going to become world champion. So what was great for me was having somebody who had that bravado and confidence, shouting from the rooftops that I was the best thing since sliced bread in the game. So I was never going to do that. That was never going to be my style. But I did my talking on the table. But I was very shy as a kid. I was a very young 20-year-old. I was a very young 18-year-old. Whatever. All I'd done is play snooker. I'd not really seen much of the other life that was out there, so to speak. The fact that of growing up and having teenage years, I was just in the snooker club, so I was pretty naive. But that was great, because I just kept my head down and played. But Barry Hearn did my talking off the table, and it was great to have somebody in your corner shouting like that. That sort of like, perhaps in another world we wouldn't have got to know each other, because we would have been two different animals. But it sort of like it worked very well that we both sort of maybe fulfilled different things in each other's lives a bit. It was I really enjoyed watching him operate as a business person watching him selling me as a commodity in the end. That was really funny watching that happen. Like, you want Davis? Yeah, great. He's 10 grand. All right. When he put the phone down, I go, how do you think of that? He said, well, I was going to say 3, but I thought I'd treble it another 1,000, whatever it might be. He was he had the confidence to sort of sell things, and that was great watching somebody who was really talented in that department. And I think he probably appreciated the graft that I was putting into snooker, and maybe the one commodity that it is very hard to you can't buy it is temperament. So if you've got a great match temperament and you're able to remain calm when everybody else is panicking around you, and a lot of people would like to be able to play sport, stand on the first tee with a crowd watching, walk out of the crucible where there's a table in the middle and everybody's around you, whatever your sporting desires, take the penalty kick at Wembley, and people have no, go, I wonder what that's like. I'm sure I'd crumble. Some people can do that, and they are put on pedestals. So maybe Barry Hearn saw that in me, and it's something that he hadn't achieved, and was in admiration of that. So we had sort of things that worked in that department. So we became a pretty formidable team in that. He became a pretty a very good sports manager before he moved into he stopped managing now. He's more into TV stuff. But at one stage, he was managing a lot of different sporting people, and it was good having chats with him as well. He'd be very philosophical about things, but he wouldn't take any bullshit. He wouldn't be the type of person who would wipe in your ass. You know, like he wouldn't be trying to sort of mollycoddle you, cotton wooling you into the room and everything. Yeah. He'd be pretty black and white, in as much as, you lost. Swallow, wipe your face, get back to the practice table. Yeah. So it wasn't a shoulder to cry on at all, but actually that was better. It worked. Yeah, perfect for me. And most of the early years we were pretty successful anyway, so it wasn't that much of a big deal.
Yeah, there wasn't many of those moments, no. But I guess that teamwork then that allowed you to just again go back to what we were talking about before. It allowed you just to go back to focusing on the practice and the winning, knowing that whatever the result, whatever the performance, Barry's going to handle that side of it. We're going to crack on with it straight afterwards as well. It's not going to dwell. That really helped for you, did it? Yeah.
I mean, I don't really know what would have happened if I hadn't have bumped into him. Would I have won 6 world championships? So, maybe not. Maybe I would have won 2. I think, I'd have still been good. It's very hard to know how it would have all transpired. I certainly wouldn't have turned professional the year I did if it was just me and my father, because there was one event every year that more or less guaranteed you could turn professional. That was the English Amateur Championship. I failed to win it that year, so I assumed I couldn't be a professional. But things were changing in that. And as I say, maybe I'd have probably sort of tried to turn professional the following year or the year after that. So I'd have been 2 years further down the line. So I wouldn't have won the World Championship the first year I did. That would have been, I don't suppose. But how I would have turned out as a person if I hadn't have bumped into Barry Hearn is interesting as well, because he gave me a lot of confidence to be myself more. And I sort of came out of my shyness maybe quicker than I would have done otherwise, although I did get thrown in the deep end of being on TV all the time. But I slowly got used to that. But as I say, going back to that point, it was good to have somebody who looked and talked super confidently, being a fan of you or being your friend, and that was good. So it made me feel pretty sort of strong in that department.
And I guess, going back to the Gods of Snooker documentary that I was watching, and how he eventually signed up lots of the other players into that kind of stable as well. I suppose that kind of gives you, or you tell me, does it kind of give you that kind of confidence to be more of yourself? If he's kind of bottled up the essence of your personality and then made it a commodity that can be sold, and then people are reacting to that quite positively, it takes the stress off you to have to try and put yourself out there because it's been done for you.
Yeah, I mean, that's the other part I was going to get around to, but I got sidetracked probably, was if you had to manage yourself, that must be tough. I mean, it's great if you've got a good agent. Mm-hmm. The trouble is there's a lot of bad ones as well. And how some people are perhaps lucky, perhaps that's the luck, who you bump into that becomes your manager, your agent, if you're a sports person and you need looking after. Because whilst you don't get your bum wiped, it's nice to have somebody booking flights. Back then, it's nice to have somebody taking all the mundanity of the moment, because even though we're not precious, but you have to be a little bit pretend precious. That you are, you are sort of in a bubble that's for your brain and everything.
Well, it's
training. You could do it yourself, but you have to do it from day one, so that you don't think it's anything special. But if all of a sudden it's all heaped upon you, you blow up with the oh god, I've got to work out. I've got a book. I can't. And talking to people on the phone would be booking. People booking you when you're trying to sell yourself would be impossible. So these things, in any type of sport or art or business, people may need an agent when they don't think they do. So it's an interesting sort of subject, because then you can seriously concentrate on everything else, and you haven't got any excuses. That's the other thing as well. So you can't even afford to have any excuses.
And that's that focus again, isn't it? All you've got to do is just get on the plane. That's when it's taking off. That's where you're going. Just focus on the game. Focus on what you're doing.
Yeah, I mean, it's it could be considered, it could be perceived to be sort of like, it's overkill and it's laziness. But when you're searching for sort of the next level, you're searching for the next couple of degrees of improvement, things get a bit crazy, in the same, if everybody's roughly the same standard in a sport, which is most sports now, everybody's getting to that standard. There's not much room for improvement in anything that's, been on TV, like golfing world, snooker world, athletics, whatever. But you're getting to the stage when most sports are at the ceiling of endeavor of what humans can achieve. So then where do you go for your next level of improvement?
Yeah.
Well, you're looking for less return for your money, but you still get a bit of a return. You want just 1%. And if you can get 1% more than the other people, makes you feel good, maybe it doesn't make a blind bit of difference, but it's how you feel about it. So you're looking at diet, sports psychology, fitness. These are all things that have nothing to do with the game you're playing. They don't get a ball in the hole, but these things you start to become very important. And then you're looking at good management. You're looking at everything in compartments that you can deal with. And so that, for me, having Barry Hearn in my corner was one of it. But
I think this is massively trailblazing, and I say this because, for example, I was speaking on the first season of the podcast. I had Chris Lewis on, the ex-England cricketer from the 90s. So we're talking about a period of cricket, late 80s through to mid-90s. And in terms of influential leaders and management and people who were advising you and taking those pressures away and guiding and all that, he just said it just wasn't like that in the game. There was nothing around there. And obviously we're talking about 10 years before. And I think you probably go another 10 to 20 years beyond Chris Lewis again before you start looking at Sir Dave Brailsford. And he kind of coined what you're talking about there as being marginal gains. What are those little things you can just change or that might just have that extra little advantage for you? So going into the sort of early to mid 80s and working in this way, combined with what we said earlier on, your mindset and approaching it and not really getting involved in kind of the emotion side of it and obviously just performing, I think that's quite ahead of its time.
Yeah, but I wasn't exactly paying the price. Fitness-wise, maybe a bit. I wasn't really paying the price in fitness, diet, sports psychology. It would have been interesting to have done that. I see that now more in snooker. I think the players now are probably getting a little bit, the majority of them, I think, are understanding that maybe they should go in the gym, even though it's not a physical game. And maybe they should, and a lot more of them have had sort of sports psychologists to talk to. It would have been an interesting parallel path if one version of me in the 80s could have, as a science experiment, one version could, or perhaps even three versions. I'll do the version where I party every night in the nightclub and just pick my cue up and knock the balls around, as if randomly, but not obviously.
Yeah.
The one that people know, the one that eventually had a spitting image puppet, and then the one that actually went to the next level of that, which was diet, vegan diet, healthy eating, sports psychologist every day, and whatever. Yeah, that could have been even better. And the argument is, of course, it should be better. How much better? I don't know.
I'm not sure you can get much better than having a spitting image puppet.
Maybe with a sports psychologist. When I was 8-0 up against Dennis Taylor and he started to come back, I could have just put my head on in his mind overnight. From 8-0 up, I was 9-7 up overnight. I felt like I'd lost. Perhaps that would have been a good chat. But Barry Hearn was also a pretty good psychologist. It was great having him in my corner. He'd come in the dressing room. We wouldn't beat ourselves up over what had gone. We'd have a chat and have a laugh. And I'd walk out the dressing room afterwards and I was smiling. Most times after having Barry Hearn in my dressing room in the mid-session interval. Yeah. It was the type of person that didn't go, here we go, what did you do that for? Or anything. Nothing negative. We just talk about positive. We wouldn't even talk about snooker. So he actually was a bit like sort of probably the good caddies for golfers.
Yeah.
They don't even know they're sports psychologists, but they've become them. So
well, I think that's a really good point, because, there is the professional side of this for professional coaches and psychologists and all those sort of things. But the power we've got is just having great conversations with people. And then being able to, as Barry in that instance said, well, we're going to have a conversation about something completely different, take your mind off that. I think, what's really interesting, you mentioned Dennis Taylor there. So we kind of coming into the mid 80s now. So we've got an 85 and 86. And what's interesting in the interviews I've seen in the past again is the two kind of things I'd love to kind of talk about here was, one, your resilience and reaction to losing a couple of World Championship finals on the trot, when I think it's fair to say you were the favourite in both of those finals, and you were an unstoppable force coming into those years. Let's start with that one first, and I'll come back to another point afterwards so we don't muddy the water. What was that like? And again, guess how did Barry deal with that?
Well, I mean, the thing about the World Championship, it's just one of many other events in the season. But because it's called the World Championship, massive emphasis is put on it. Other sports are slightly different. I mean, you feel like tennis, golf, Grand Slam events, you've got more than one on the level of importance. You might go, you might put some in front of others like Wimbledon, all that, but it's not defining you as a player if you don't win Wimbledon, but you win the US Open. These things they're still big, they're massive. So, but in the snooker world, it always felt like the World Championship was the only one. Certainly to the public as well, much more to the public than it may be done to the players. But if you had to wait a year in between losing a World Championship to have another crack at it, sort of as if it was like the Olympics or worse than the Olympics, that would be quite a tough pill to swallow. If you went all the way in a match and then missed the final black, and you'd probably have problems with that. But there's another tournament around the corner, so that was an ongoing thing. So I won events after I lost to Dennis Taylor the next season, quite early on in the season. So effectively, sort of all forgotten a bit. You look to the next match, you look to the next game. The only problem with the World Championship at that time was it was the last event of the season. So then the summer happened. So after I lost to Dennis Taylor from 8-0 in front, and then
you're not still bitter about it.
It happens. I had most of the summer to just sort of stew on it. So that wasn't the greatest summer. I mean, I did, we played snooker and went on tours and everything, but you replay shots in your mind and you go, oh, if I'd have only done that. And and then also your mind twists things as well. And if you look back on video, it wasn't as it seemed anyway. But I think that's when you need to be pretty philosophical and be an optimist. That it doesn't matter what's happened. There's another match round the corner to look forward to get ready for, and I think it helps if you're, funnily enough, if it's not about your trophy cabinet, that's not why you're doing it. Because if you enjoy the game, or you enjoy the challenge of the game, or you enjoy what you're doing in business, even failing's not a problem, because it's about the next deal. And as long as you're not the type of person that beats yourself up, you can be optimistic that the next deal is when it's all going to go right. So waiting for the next match, which for me after losing to Dennis was in October, was a long time, but have a holiday, forget about it, then get back to the practice table and look forward like you'd look forward to Christmas to the next match, not with a view to going, oh, I hope it doesn't happen again, but just look forward to the excitement of the match, because it's it's all about the adrenaline buzz. And if you try and analyze why you're doing it, it's the adrenaline buzz. Yeah, there's prize money, but if you've experienced something like turning up to the Crucible Theatre to play snooker, you want more of it. No money at all. It's just your body feels like nothing, no other way. I think I sort of described it as sort of like the cross between your driving exam, your first your driving test, your first exams at school, your first job interview, a visit to the dentist, stick them all in a blender and you may get close to what it's like walking out for a big match that's going to be on television. Your stomach's in turmoil.
I'm starting to feel it myself now. You've mentioned a few of those things. The driving test, and I think it was my French oral exam. My French oral exam at GCSE was the most scary experience. Here's a piece of paper. From now on, you open that door, you will speak and hear nothing other than French. I can't do this. Let me out.
but that feeling, your body's alive while it's happening. Yeah, I mean, maybe you have to run to the toilet a couple of times, but even that's worth it.
I think it's really interesting.
I did see it was a guy. He wasn't a very well-known player. He was physically sick in the toilets twice before he went out to play his first ever appearance at the World Championship. And he was a decent player, but he was totally affected by it. Yeah. You should have been in the dressing room with him. You could have helped him there. I don't know how, but
who knows? We'll never know.
Held the sick bag.
That's it. That would have helped. I think it's really interesting. I'm gonna kind of take a little bit of a tangent and then maybe come back to that, because you've mentioned about the kind of the driving force there for you. That yes, all right, there was a few games that you'd lost, and I think it's fair to say there's a lot of players at that time and in future and across other disciplines, sports and business, that might have started going, you know what, 2 defeats in a world championship, is it going to happen again? Am I going to get to do that again? And maybe when the next time they arrive, it's going to be playing on the mind too much, and that affects them, maybe doesn't get them to do that. And you kind of fast forward and you look at in the early 90s, Stephen Hendry and Jimmy White, that kind of dynasty of finals that they had there. And I think, it's an interesting thing to explore against that kind of trailblazing mindset. I still think you showing in the 80s around that do you think that two things happen in there? That one, Stephen Hendry was just next level winning. And I think one of the most interesting interviews I've seen is between yourself and him. And you talked about that love of the game. You talked about that once you stopped winning the world championships and ranking events, that you still wanted just to carry on playing because you loved the game that much, that buzz that you talk about. Whereas Stephen Hendry talked more about, once I didn't really think I could win anymore, the buzz went.
Yeah.
Do you think that's fair to?
Yeah. But he said that. He said once he stopped winning or felt like he was in that winning zone, that all of a sudden he stopped enjoying it. I mean, that to some degree we understand that. I mean, it's not as enjoyable losing all the time, but there's a driving force in you still enjoying the challenge of it all. It's maybe like the boxer that's become a little bit punch drunk. His chin's gone a bit. He still can tell himself that, maybe the next time, I'm going to go in the gym and train for it because that's my life, and then get ready for the next match. And then he loses again, and he goes back and he keeps on going to the well for the enthusiasm. And there's still plenty in there, even though there maybe shouldn't be. And so you can keep on doing that. And it feels like Stephen Hendry, in a way, analytically, was pretty sensible in one respect of going, you know what, I don't enjoy it. I'm not enjoying having to go to this well of enthusiasm. It's not coming as easily. Perhaps it's time to jack it in. And when he did do that, I was in awe of thinking, gee whiz, like what I did was I was like pulling teeth, slowly sliding down the wall of getting more and more people able to beat you, and then slowly losing your confidence, and occasionally getting a good result. But those occasional good results seem to make it all worthwhile until all of a sudden, a little bit further sliding down the wall. But when Stephen retired, he's still at the top of the game. I thought, wow, that's amazing. How strong mentally is that to go, no, this is the time. To retire at the top is a crazy thing to do, I think. Crazy, amazing thing to do, not crazy, an amazing thing to do. And the trouble is, as long as you don't have any regrets. And I know Stephen's gone back to trying to compete a bit, as if it was just a little bit that he'd left, that he hadn't turned a couple of stones over. Yeah, I think maybe those stones have turned over now, and he's realised that maybe. But I don't think he didn't like the game. He loved the game, but he also loved the buzz of the winning and being in the centre stage. And I think that's why he was so good, because he absolutely loved being the dominant force. Maybe more than I did. I mean, we all love to be. All good winners are good bullies as well. But maybe he was the ultimate bully, to really dominate and take the game on to another level.
Well, it's interesting you say that.
The reason he beat Jimmy White was that Jimmy was very close. Jimmy was so unlucky not to win the World Championship, right time, wrong play, whatever it might be. But unfortunately, he came up against Stephen Hendry, who was a winning machine. Things would have been slightly different had it not been Stephen Hendry in the final, because he had for a while that sort of that force field around him that you couldn't get near him. Mentally he was so strong, and that's what happens if you keep on winning. You get reinforcement that you're nobody can hurt you. That it makes it even better. But eventually, the next level came up, and then Stephen was struggling with the likes of John Higgins and Ronnie O'Sullivan, and then the floodgates open. Next generation come in. Everybody seems to be beating you. That's life.
Yeah. That's it. Well, it's interesting you mentioned about that there can be the best bullies, because again, in that same interview of the two of you, I think you talked about, you'd beat Jimmy a few times in the 80s in the World Championships, and you actually said, I felt a bit sorry for him. I just seemed to keep beating him whenever I played him. Didn't you ever feel sorry for him? And Stephen Hendry went, no. Why would I feel sorry for him?
Well, I'm not too sure what the interview was, but I didn't feel sorry for him at all. But you don't. Yeah, it's all about you. It's all about me. Don't care who it is. But that's not to say that looking back, I can now say I think it'd have been nice for everybody had Jimmy White won the World Championship once, and he had a couple of cracking chances, but not against me, against other people. I didn't want him to win against me at all.
Yeah.
And it's quite nice when occasionally people come up and say, why didn't you what a weird thing to say. Why didn't you let somebody, right, is that how sport works? But looking back now, what Jimmy White gave to snooker entertainment wise, and also, the standard he produced, I think he just on two occasions had one more ball gone in a pocket. In the World Championship, he would have perhaps won the World Championship. And I think it's wrong in a way to say that those people haven't got it, as if there's that's black and white about winners and losers. It's not, because Jimmy White was a winner. He wasn't a loser. He lost 6 World Snooker Championships. Yes, but 2 of them he could easily have won. And I do think there's a massive luck element. And then we retrospectively look at certain people as being the ones we put on the pedestal of achievement, and others you don't. It's never that black. There's a grey area.
So exploring that, you talked about that you had that, whilst you might have a summer thinking about it and dwelling on it a little bit, you focused on the next and moved forward and forgot about it. Obviously with Jimmy in the early 90s, as opposed to yourself, it was almost the same opponent every time he was in that final.
Yeah.
So do you think those couple of occasions where he got close, it played on him a little bit, that I've not done this before and it might come back?
Well, it can do, yeah. I mean, even if the game of snooker or the game of golf, as we've talked about, very similar games, still ball games. It's nothing personal. You're playing the course, you're playing the table, you're not playing the person. As much as you can tell yourself that, if the guy that you're playing keeps on beating you, you are in the end playing the person. And that's that's something to fight against. And I mean, I struggled severely playing Stephen in the. I lost my confidence playing against him when he consistently beat me. But of course, the problem is remaining positive when you're losing is difficult, and probably the way to do it, as I thought Stephen Hendry was doing a pretty good job of, when the next generation came along, of saying it's not about me, it's about them. They're playing great. I'm not playing badly. It's just that the standard's getting better. But I sort of started to beat myself up during the 90s that what am I doing wrong compared to what I was doing right in the 80s? What I should have said was, bloody hell, Stephen's taken it to another level. I'm still brilliant, but I've just got to deal with the fact that he's great and naturally admire that and enjoy the challenge of trying to beat him. as the underdog. But of course, from the position I was in, where I'd been so much the favourite, it just looked like a failure in the 90s. So that's maybe the time in my career when the sports psychologist would have really come to the fore. I don't think I would have necessarily needed one when I was having it all my own way, but I do think that actually having a fresh outlook on what was happening would have been a good thing. So in the end with Stephen Hendry, I don't exactly know how he came to the conclusions of what was happening. Perhaps somebody could have helped him to do that. And I'm sure somebody could have helped Jimmy, although from his own admission, they'd have had to have found him in a nightclub and dragged him out and then had a chat with him the next morning.
Yeah. Because if you want to know more about that, there's plenty more on that on Gods of Snooker as well.
This is no secret. I mean, the fact that he was a party animal and he played fantastically well at snooker shows you sort of what level he was actually at. And once again, it would have been a fascinating story if you could have seen a different style Jimmy White, perhaps coming from a different perspective.
Well, he talked about he actually said it was the game of snooker that pulled him back in. Every single time he was in those sort of deep moments. If you kind of like fast forward then, and we kind of come to the more modern day, and Ronnie O'Sullivan, the kind of the owner of that throne now of both People's Champion, but also extremely successful at the World Championships. You're at a point now where you could argue those type of thoughts of you in the 90s and then Stephen Hendry towards the end of the 90s of when's the time to call it a day, or how much have I got more in the tank? Where do you think he is now? Do you think there's more to come, or do you think it's probably plateauing? Or
I don't know for sure. I don't talk to Ronnie that much to sort of, and I think that's a personal subject. I don't think I'd feel comfortable asking me those questions. I mean, maybe, if you're doing an interview of BBC, you would ask those, but not on a one-to-one basis. I wouldn't like to really go down that road with him. But judging from afar, I think he's been pretty sensible in doing other things as well as playing snooker, like sort of not making it everything in his life. Whether that's a natural progression of being in the game for a long period of time, it seems to work for him. He keeps himself very fit, same as John Higgins has recently been doing as well. So sort of like, he had a word with himself when I'm getting out of hand. It's time to. So he looks leaner and meaner coming into this year's World Championship. And it's amazing that Ronnie O'Sullivan, Mark Williams and John Higgins are all, in their late 40s now and still producing. It's not an athletic game, but trust me, when you get to that age, you're starting to sort of, maybe things are starting to go wrong. So they're doing an incredible job, the three of them. But Ronnie O'Sullivan especially, like he runs and he keeps himself fit in that department. And I think he's worked out a way to enjoy it. Whereas you could have started to feel like it was an albatross around his neck, in as much as, here we go again. I've got to live up to my image and name and everything. So he goes, no, like, it's not the end of the world. If I lose, I lose. If I win, great, but I'm not going to get overboard about it. And as long as he can generate the interest and the adrenaline when he needs it, and as long as he's got the work ethic to go to the practice table, which apparently he does have, so he's not just going, I'm bored with snooker, I can't even bother to practice because it's just like pulling teeth. That can happen. As long as he does those things, who knows? I definitely think he could be it's the first world champion over the age of 50. Certainly in the modern day game. I don't know about Joe Davis back in the, that was another era. That's not the same thing. Yeah. So I think Ronnie O'Sullivan is best placed to push the barriers of what a snooker player can do further into their life. And he has got a good work ethic. So the same as John Higgins.
And he's always been looking at those things. You mentioned about the psychology behind it. I know that in his career, he's had episodes where he's had Steve Peters that's worked with him on the psychology side of things. I know famously as well, he had Ray Reardon in his corner. One of the World Championships, it really helped him. I think he put the teeth in when he was celebrating, wasn't it, looking up at him.
That was the weirdest one of all.
Very weird, but you can sort of see there, compare him to maybe the likes of Alex Higgins and maybe even Jimmy White to some degree, and kind of saying you can see that there's something there that he was playing with to try and say, I want to try and make this difference. I want to try something different to keep myself relevant and keep myself focused and performing the best I can?
I think affecting change in that way is, is good. Is never staying exactly the same. I mean, trying out different things is a good idea. I mean, in a way, trying out different things for the mental side of your game is probably better than trying out different things in the technical department, because if you're always tinkering with your technique, that's probably wrong. I think maybe technique after a while looks after itself. Yeah, it's good to have an overview on that, but every now and again you may have a reason to go, you're doing this is totally different to what you were doing back then, but not like, okay, so there's my, okay, I'm going to move that finger to there instead of there. Things like that are not going to make a blind bit of difference. Even if you think they are in practice, they never transpire that they work in the heat of the moment. But actually having a different mindset might be a different story. But unfortunately, I can't talk about it. I never went down that road. And towards the end of my career, I suppose I could have gone down that road as a test. But that's not the right reasons for doing it. You can't. So I guess I'm going to try this out as a so we could do a documentary on it. That wouldn't work because you wouldn't be fully committed.
No, I get that.
And I think earlier on in my career, I couldn't have done it because that's not the era I grew up in. But it would have been interesting to know.
Well, I also think that in the 80s, though, when we've been talking about, I think that not so much that you do yourself a disservice, but you were trailblazing that mindset piece, but it wasn't called that then, or it wasn't being referred to, or people weren't talking about it in the same way. When you kind of come back, though, I mentioned I wanted to come back to those mid 80s, and weirdly, you just said about trying things that are different. Again, I've seen in a few interviews and I've read a few times that it was actually the losses against the likes of Dennis that started to move the public opinion towards yourself, because we love someone who's fallen down and then is still good, and we like to see the personality and how they respond to it. And that actually got you much more popular again in terms of the British public, and to a point where, when I say trying things new, singing a little ditty with Chas and Dave and co. How was all that?
Yeah, mid 80s. Yeah, well, weird things happened. That was Barry Hearn's ideas for having a bit of fun, was to contact Chas and Dave after he'd seen the success. I don't know if it was success of the Tottenham Hotspur Ozzy Ardiles song.
Yeah.
I think he contacted Chas and Dave and said, "Can you write a snooker song?" A one-off weird thing to happen, but why not have a bit of fun? It was great. Like, we were in the charts. We got to number 6 in the charts. You're looking at a pop star. All those things. I mean, we had so much fun. It was so not serious. If I look back, it was. I went to the snooker club practice every day when I wasn't working, doing exhibitions or playing in matches. I'd go to a snooker club just in a club every day. What a great day's work that is. That's what people. That's what people do is in their part as their hobby. So go to the snooker club, have a laugh with your mates every day practicing.
Yeah.
Zone out a bit. They're all having a laugh at the bar. You zone out. So they're still there, but you're concentrating, and then go to the bar, have some lunch, and then come back and have a bit more practice or spar with another good player. And that was a day. What a great day. And then you do an exhibition and you entertain people, and then you'd be on a telly doing something else with, you'd be, oh, bloody hell, we got a video out. It's on Top of the Pops. It was great. It was a great laugh. So we had a bloody good time during all this time. And even in the 90s, even when I was like going, oh, it's just all gone wrong, I was still having a great time.
Yeah.
So I'm beating myself up a bit more than I should have done, but I was still absolutely enjoying myself and still won a bit more. But along the way, all of these things that happened was ridiculous, and then you get loads of awards, sports personality. I got sports personality. I mean, what happened there? What went wrong that year?
What you remember what year that was?
87, 88, something like that.
Well, I think you probably use that when the Spitting Image was at its height as well. So there's kind of like, you've got the commodity, you've got your popularity because you've just lost a couple of finals, so everyone's on your side again. It's amazing. It's
I think the other Red Rum was the other one in the running that year from sports personality. It was a close run thing, and Ballyregan Bob, a well-known greyhound. I beat them. I had a slightly more personality than a horse and a dog.
You'd have been gutted if you'd have finished second. So was that the kind of like coming to the modern day and kind of away from snooker? Was that the start, the Chas and Dave, the affiliation with music? Because I know you've recently been DJing at Glastonbury, haven't you? Yeah,
we've done lots of other things. Well, as one door closes, I had no plan to end up in the musical world at all, but a series of consequences ended up being. I'm now sort of, we do DJing and play music in a band. If anybody had told me this was going to happen to my life, I'd have laughed in their face in the 80s. But once again, a hobby that ends up as some type of profession is a great thing to do. If you can have a hobby that becomes your job, I think you've had it off in life. That is the ultimate. And I think, if you're not enjoying what your job is, I know there's reasons why you'd have to stay in it. I know that. But if you don't enjoy your job and you're able to affect change, I think you owe it to yourself to do that. And, there's lots of avenues for somehow turning your hobby into your job. And if you can find that, and I think you find a great benefit from it. So my other hobby, as well as snooker, was I've always been interested in music, collecting records, and that sort of ended up me DJing on various radio shows, and then being invited to DJ live, and then getting some publicity, which was obviously quite nice because Steve Davis DJing, what's going on? Next minute, Glastonbury. Our second ever gig was at DJing gig was Glastonbury. Like people work all their life as a DJ to try and get to Glastonbury and never get there.
How did walking out onto that stage compare to walking out to the Crucible for the first time?
I don't know, because I'd had a bottle of gin. I've never walked out to a snooker match with a bottle of gin inside me. So we were so nervous. I've never been so nervous in my life. And I've also been on stage now playing in a band, and they're so nervous. I don't know why I've done it to myself. Once I retired from snooker, I could probably have had a lovely, I could have taken up gardening and had quite a nice sort of like no adrenaline, no butterflies in the stomach life. So what did I do? We started doing things in front of the public again. Adrenaline junkie. Even though I don't look like it, I'm an adrenaline junkie.
Music personality of the year, adrenaline personality of the year. Now that's what we need.
What can you say?
So if people want to follow what you're doing on that, then Steve, if people want to keep a view on the exploits and the adrenaline habits of Steve Davis, where's the best for them to have?
I'm not telling anybody what I'm doing. It's just for me. It's not for anybody else. We got. I ended up going to a music gig and seeing somebody play a modular synthesizer. Have I got one to hand? I have, but it'd be a bit messy to show you. So a modular synthesizer is something, it doesn't even have a keyboard. It doesn't have to have a keyboard. And the noises are made through voltage, and you plug wires in like a telephone exchange. And that's how you get sounds out. And I saw somebody playing one of these. I thought, wow, I could do that. There's no keyboard. You haven't got to do 10,000 hours of practice. You just plug the wires in and learn how that works. And I ended up with my mates who I did a radio show with, and another guy that's good friends who are musicians, going, let's get together and have a few beers, and you can play your thing and we'll do ours. And we ended up making some music, which we then made into an album. And we got an album out. So we have an album. Our band's called the Utopia Strong. And we're on the brink of our second album coming out in June, and probably a few more gigs as well. So, as I say, this wasn't a plan; it's just happened by accident. But then,
you're hoping just to have a nice rest and a sit down, and now suddenly you're going to be touring the country.
But if I be truly honest, there was no plan for being a snooker player. It just happened.
But that's the best thing then. The best things, the hobbies that become the way you live in. I love it. Absolutely love it. So we're getting to the end of the show then, Steve. So a couple of things. The reason why it's called Leadership Untitled is because I like to get to the end of the episode and kind of look back at the conversation that we've had and say, right, in terms of a theme, in terms of a single lesson or a title for the show, what might that look like? So I'll leave that sort of stewing for a second between the two of us of what that might be. And the other question, obviously, with the World Championships around the corner, and this will probably be coming out around that sort of time. If people are fancying a flutter, where would you think they should put their money? Putting you on the spot.
Well, for the winner, I think it's tough. It's so tough. And anybody who's currently winning, and we're doing this talking now on Judd Trump's just won the last event. So you're always sort of swayed by who's currently in form. But I think there's a lot of people in form. And I think, as we talked about earlier, that the levels, the ceiling of achievement of snooker players now is getting closer to that level of what's achievable. So more players, I think, are now could win the World Championship of the field than anybody any previous year. There may have been a time when there was a handful that's going to come from these 5 players, but now. There's so many players, including some really good young Chinese players. Zhao Jingtong's great. But Judd Trump and Neil Robertson look really dangerous at the moment. And obviously Ronnie O'Sullivan, John Higgins and Mark Williams, you never know what they're capable of because they are astonishing players. So if you're looking for value, that's tough. I don't know where you look for the value. There is an interesting idea that because the standard of players is so good, that the bookmakers are always maybe giving a bit too strong a favourite and underdog. You could maybe argue if you bet, and I wouldn't do it with my own money, but I could do it with somebody else's money. You back the underdog in every match for a unit price, and I think one UK Championship this year. You'd have won a lot of money by backing the underdog. Loads of favourites got knocked out. So that could happen, even at the World Championship, which sometimes polarises the strong and the weak. Even at the World Championship now, there are no weak players. No. So why not back the underdog?
There you go. Look at underdogs then.
But don't come knocking on my door. If you are going to knock on my door, knock with a sponge, as Willie Thorne used to say.
Bless him. God rest his soul. And the sort of second unfair question, if you were to say, and you can take yourself into or out of this equation, who would you say the greatest ever was or is? The greatest ever?
Well, it's tough to compare eras, isn't it? It's unfair as well on those people. Ronnie O'Sullivan and John Higgins, the two most amazing players I think I've ever seen. But obviously Stephen Hendry holds the record of 7 World Championships, and it doesn't matter really what year, he still won 7 World Championships. So maybe you could argue, who's ahead of their game? Who's ahead of how far ahead of the general pack has Ronnie O'Sullivan been? I think he's been astonishing at times. Obviously, Stephen Hendry and myself are pretty good. But then you go back to players before that, like Ray Reardon, Joe Davis. Who knows what would have happened if they were all born in the same era? Yeah. That I haven't got a clue. That would have been quite an interesting parallel universe. But Ronnie O'Sullivan is the only player on the planet that I've ever wondered what pictures he's seeing. Whether he's seeing something different to the rest of us.
When he's in that zone, and the longevity of it as well. You look at players like that we kind of flippantly talked about, those people champions, those natural talents, and they kind of burn out quite quickly regularly in a lot of sports. But the longevity of him, and below also John Higgins that you mentioned, and Mark Williams, it's another level.
The trouble is, for them, they've also got to beat, and in the right frame of mind as well, a certain Mark Selby, who is an astonishing character and one of the great competitors of all time. The list of players, you just forget about sometimes. Not that they're not great players, but so many great players.
Well, you mentioned Mark Selby. It's interesting because I look at Mark Selby and at times, probably sort of the middle of his career, people like Peter Ebdon, those are the ones that the crowds didn't like again. And maybe that was sort of akin to yourself when you were first in that first phase and you started getting some of the boos because you were winning in a way that they wanted the people's champions to win.
Yeah, but fascinating. Yeah, but fascinating competitors. Both those names are fascinating competitors, and Peter Ebdon in his prime. Wow, what a performer! What a strength, mental sort of like blinkers on. Yeah, he's moved on to other areas now of his life, but an incredible intense. Yeah, and that's something that people would like to bottle.
Oh, absolutely. And it came pouring out at the end of matches as well when you want to know. It's brilliant stuff. So a title of the things we've been talking about.
Well, even though it wouldn't appear like that's how things happen and how you achieve another level, I think going with the flow is an interesting thing to if you're sitting on top of a thoroughbred horse and you've never really sat on a horse and it's going to be doing the work and you're just going to hopefully be guiding it along its way. If you can sort of look at your talent as a sort of that massive beast going along, and you're there trying to harness it somehow and guide it, and not get in its way, not halt it. Somehow going with the flow of your hobby becomes your profession, the talent you've got on the planet, and you don't interfere with it. You don't get in its way. Mm-hmm. So going with the flow and guiding it rather than trying to steer it. It's a slight difference.
I like that. Going with the flow. That is what the episode of title officially is going to be, Steve. Brilliant. Thanks for that. And thank you again for coming along today. I've really enjoyed the conversation.
Absolute pleasure.
Absolutely loved it. And anyone who wants to find out some of the details or some of the watch the shows that we've been talking about in the episode, I'll put some links in there as well, and maybe try and find a few spitting images and put those on as well. All those sort of things. Brilliant stuff. Thanks again, Steve, and have a fantastic day.
Thank you, Rob. Pleasure.
Cheers now. Bye bye. So that brings us to the end of this episode of the Leadership Untitled podcast, and this episode will be called Going with the Flow. That's all related to Steve's own view that if you can find a hobby that becomes a role and something that you fall into, maybe like he did with snooker, you'll never work a day in your life. Or in other words, you'll actually have a hell of a lot of fun along the way. My thanks again to Steve for coming along today, and to you, the listeners. And if you've not done so already, please make sure that you like and subscribe and follow the podcast on your provider of choice or on YouTube, where you can find the video version of this show. Until next time, have a great day. Bye now.